that we've done. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm Sissy Petty. I'm the Vice President for Student Affairs at Loyola and have the honor of serving as President of JASPA. I do want to take a moment, since this is our first live professional development opportunity, to thank those who have put in so much time and effort to get this up and running and for us to move into the greater world of technology and being able to be together. So this is just really terrific. Today we're honored to have Father Andy Thon, SJ, join us. Andy is currently a professor in educational policy and leadership development at Marquette University. He served as Vice President for Student Affairs at Marquette from 1999 to 2008. He's a true Jesuit because he's a Triple Crown winner from his degrees being from St. Louis University, Regis College, and also his PhD in higher education at the University of Wisconsin. Throughout his academic career, Father Thon has taken a love of music with him, earning the nickname of Father Andy Thon, SJ DJ, for his ability to match just the right song to the occasion. Father Thon entered the Society of Jesus in 1960, was ordained in 1971. During this time, he has been an active member of JASPA, including serving as president from 2008 to 2010. His most recent publication, entitled The Ignatian Imperative, Student Affairs Educators in Jesuit Education, for which Andy was awarded the 2013 JASPA Scholarship Award. Please join me in welcoming Andy Thon. Thank you.
Oops. Okay, here we go. Can you hear us here?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. This side, and we can go ahead and talk. Hello, everyone. Greetings from Marquette University, where it's snowing. I'm very honored to offer some remarks at this JASPA webinar. I would like to thank Casey from Loyola University Chicago and Nicholas from Marquette for their much appreciated work in setting up the technology for this webinar. JASPA members have just received initial information that next March's annual JASPA Spring Conference will be celebrating JASPA's 60th anniversary. My new book, The Ignatian Imperative, Student Affairs Educators in Jesuit Higher Education, provides a history of student affairs in Jesuit schools since 1989 and describes the clear relationships between some enduring values of the Jesuit educational mission and the values of our student affairs profession. I'm very grateful for the grants I received, which enabled complimentary copies of this book to be sent to the Senior Student Affairs Officer, or SSAO, at each Jesuit college and university to be distributed to student affairs staff and interested others on campus. My comments today will touch on several areas of the book. One of the courses I teach in the Graduate College Student Personnel Program at Marquette University is the seminar for students doing their practicums at different sites at Marquette and other colleges and universities in the Milwaukee area. I begin the course with some readings and discussion on the institutional mission of the school, and that understanding and appreciating this mission has to be the foundation of one's work in student affairs. I stress that the mission is not just what is in the institution's catalog, strategic plan, or speeches by the president. It is the living mission that is manifested in the roles and actions of faculty, administrators, and students on campus. The enduring values of the 465-year mission and tradition of Jesuit education are still very relevant for today's Jesuit colleges and universities and our student affairs work. My focus today, as you can see on the screen, are four areas. A brief historical background of the development of student affairs at Jesuit college universities, what I have labeled as 5 significant moments in the 60 years of JASPA and student affairs on Jesuit campuses, and then 3 enduring values of the Jesuit educational mission and their relationship to student affairs, and I will conclude with some comments on student affairs and Catholic identity. I want to begin with a brief historical background on how student affairs in Jesuit schools and JASPA became an integral part of the living mission of Jesuit colleges and universities. Having this historical background is important as we approach and celebrate the 60th anniversary of JASPA. Student affairs as a profession developed more slowly at Jesuit schools. The first student personnel administrator on a Jesuit campus was called the Prefect of Discipline and was a Jesuit who already had good interactions with students. While this Jesuit's primary role was being a disciplinarian with student conduct, the Jesuit also was a counselor, father figure, and sometimes confessor. The Prefect of Discipline helped students develop the social behavior and moral values which were proper to cultured Christian gentlemen of the time, since most Jesuit schools had mostly male students at that time. By the 1950s, the Prefect of Discipline title changed to Dean of Men. At a 1952 meeting of the Jesuit Educational Association, the former name of our current AJCU, the Jesuit Dean of Men at Georgetown was the first Jesuit to exhort this group of Jesuit presidents and academic deans that student personnel services were an essential part of the mission of Jesuit higher education. This Jesuit dean advocated that the Dean of Men be on an equal administrative level with the academic dean, rather than reporting to the academic dean. Interesting how there is more discussion today on having the SSAO report to the provost in order to help provide seamless learning experiences for our students. At this 1952 meeting, the Jesuit Dean of Men also called for more student rights and increased student involvement in institutional policymaking. Some things on campus don't change very much. His words and approach did not appeal to most of his Jesuit colleagues who feared that more influential roles for student personnel services and for students would detract from the institution's academic and religious beliefs. There are still concerns today about maintaining the primary place of the academic and religious missions of the Jesuit school. Let me begin to talk about 5 significant moments in Jesuit with JASPA and student affairs in Jesuit higher education. The first one, the founding of JASPA. In 1953, the Jesuit Deans of Men at Georgetown and Loyola New Orleans were the first Catholic priests to attend a NASPA conference. The following year, 1954, 6 Jesuit school Deans of Men met at the NASPA conference to set up a new Jesuit Student Personnel Association. In 1958, after 4 years of meeting informally at the NASPA conference, representatives from 16 Jesuit schools formally organized JASPA. The initial JASPA membership was comprised of male deans of students, who are now the new SSAOs, and deans of men. Deans of women and other student affairs personnel were not involved in JASPA until the mid-1960s. The second significant moment, the 1965 JASPA Summer Workshop. After continuing to meet at the annual NASPA conferences and attend the Jesuit Educational Association meetings, JASPA sponsored its own first summer workshop in 1965. There were 82 participants, 57 of whom were Jesuits. There were also 12 deans of women who were included in JASPA meetings for the first time. The 2-week workshop was a major breakthrough of the student personnel profession at Jesuit schools. The summary of the workshop presentations, discussions, and recommendations resulted in a 587-page book known as the Big Red Book. Number 3, the third significant moment, the emergence of lay student affairs staff. After the 1965 workshop, everything that happened nationally and on college campuses during the late 60s and the early 70s deeply impacted all of higher education, including student affairs, and moderated the enthusiasm of the 1965 JASPA Summer Workshop. In 1965, 23 of the 28 SSAOs at Jesuit schools were Jesuits. In 1970, 5 years later, the only 5 Jesuits were SSAOs. Rather than work in the hectic area of student affairs during those years, more Jesuits were now interested in campus ministry and social justice ministry, not in student affairs. Another factor was the separate incorporation of Jesuit colleges and universities, which began in the mid-1960s, when the Jesuit-only boards of trustees were turned over to lay boards of trustees. The second JASPA Summer Workshop in 1972 also saw a decrease in Jesuit participants, as there were only 28 Jesuits among the 86 participants. During the 1970s and 80s, there was some confusion on the role and authority of the Jesuit community on Jesuit campuses, including how to ensure the moral and spiritual development of the students. The student population was becoming increasingly diverse with the presence of more women and minorities on campus. There were new federal regulations such as confidentiality of student records, parity for women's athletics, handicapped access, and due process, which impacted colleges and universities. With the roles of student affairs administration becoming more complex and demanding more managerial skills, there were only a few Jesuits involved in student affairs. During these years, the student affairs profession began to focus more on student development rather than on just providing programs, activities, and services for students outside the classroom. The fourth significant moment, the 1990s. In 1989, Georgetown University hosted Assembly 89, Jesuit Ministry in Higher Education, to celebrate 200 years of Jesuit higher education in the United States. As part of this bicentennial celebration, I wrote and published the Ignatian Perspective, the role of student affairs in Jesuit higher education, which provided for the first time a history of student affairs on Jesuit campuses. In the early 1990s, there began to be more requests to register gay, lesbian, pro-choice, and other controversial student groups. I was part of a JASPA team that wrote the 1991 a working paper on registration of controversial student organizations on Jesuit college campuses. The purpose of this working paper was to provide a framework or a context for addressing registration and recognition requests from controversial student organizations. The term controversial referred to student groups whose purposes may seem to be in some conflict with the Catholic and Jesuit missions of the institution. At this time, in the 90s, there was a lot of emphasis on Jesuit campuses to return to their Ignatian roots, and mission and identity offices began to be initiated at most Jesuit colleges and universities. In 1997, JASPA sponsored the initial National Jesuit Student Leadership Conference called NJSLC. Its purpose was to provide Jesuit mission-based leadership training for student government leaders on Jesuit campuses. During the 1990s, as you know, the student affairs profession began a major focus on learning and learning outcomes as important parts of a student's out-of-class experiences. The fifth significant moment in the history of JASPA and student affairs in Jesuit schools is lay leadership. Since 2000, there has been a significant increase in lay presidents and lay senior administrators at Jesuit colleges and universities. There also is a much stronger lay leadership in student affairs at Jesuit schools and in JASPA. Today's call for student affairs at Jesuit colleges and universities is that lay leadership and staff continue to value the importance of understanding, appreciating, and carrying out the institution's Jesuit mission. In the student affairs profession, there is now even stronger emphasis on collaboration with academic affairs to provide seamless learning experiences for our students. The Ignatian Imperative provides a summary of the themes of the JASPA Summer Institutes that have occurred every 5 years since 1990. This summary gives a historical picture of the key issues and concerns for student affairs at Jesuit schools at the time of each Summer Institute. Enduring values. Chapter 3 of the Ignatian Imperative describes some clear relationships between 5 enduring values of the Jesuit educational mission and the values of the student affairs profession. Today, I will talk about 3 of these enduring values. These are values that we can integrate into our student affairs work and our personal lives. By role modeling these values, we can guide students in seeing the importance of integrating these values into their lives. The first enduring value is cura personalis, which you're all familiar with. The student affairs profession has always had an ethic of care by helping students feel affirmed, that they matter, and that they have a sense of belonging on campus. Cura personalis in the Jesuit tradition stems from Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. Ignatius wanted Jesuit superiors to manifest care for each individual Jesuit and their unique gifts, talents, needs, and potential. Ignatius also expected the same personal care from retreat directors in working with individual retreatants. From the very beginning, Jesuit education focused on the needs and characteristics of the individual student in addition to the course material. Let me give you a simple example. Say you're in a grocery store and you're looking for the pickle jar. You can get different responses, and you probably have seen these. You ask one of the store staff, and sometimes a person will say, well, I don't know where it is. Or you go to another person, and they might point to the aisle where the pickle jars are. Or another person will say, let me take you to the exact place. This is close to what we mean by cura personalis. But cura personalis is much more profound than just good customer service. Cura personalis affirms the dignity of and the respect for each individual. Cura personalis is not a buzzword or just on campus banners or something to take for granted. For example, some years ago, a Marquette student newspaper editorial had this title, Cura personalis, but not if you're gay. A student viewpoint in last week's Marquette student newspaper was titled, Embody Cura personalis on campus. The writer said that cura personalis was mentioned 100+ times on the Marquette website, but he encouraged everyone that we need to have more mutual respect and acceptance of others on campus. Another aspect of cura personalis that is often overlooked is that it also means taking care of oneself. Sometimes we ourselves and our students think it can be a little selfish to spend time taking care of ourselves amidst so many deep needs and tasks to attend to. We especially need to help those students who are over-involved and overwhelmed and encourage them to sometimes say no. As student affairs professionals who role model cura personalis, we need to help all students take care of themselves by making healthy lifestyle choices during their college years. Unity of heart and mind. The early American colleges valued education of the whole person. The classroom, chapel, residence hall, playing field were all connected as part of the educational process. The student affairs profession has always valued the development of the whole person. Today, there is even more focus on educating the whole person, with the student affairs emphasis on seamless learning experiences and the student affairs profession's increased interest in the student's spiritual development. In both retreat work and education, Ignatius emphasized the unity of heart and mind, that there be consistency and congruence between what one thinks and what one feels. In education, this means going beyond the transmission of knowledge, processing information, and developing one's mind. It also means paying attention to a student's feelings. That is why a goal of Jesuit education has always been educating students to both be academically competent and compassionate human beings. An added emphasis from recent addresses of Jesuit superior generals is that today's students need a global perspective, and that, quote, our graduates become whole persons of solidarity. The third enduring value that I want to speak about is contemplatives in action. Having a habit of reflection is being stressed more as extremely important for today's leaders and administrators. The importance of reflection is especially manifested today in student affairs, in the student affairs profession's emphasis on assessment and learning outcomes. For my college student personnel grad students, I emphasize reflection in their weekly journals. I don't want just a list of the tasks and activities at their practicum site since their last retreat. I want their reflections on their learning experiences. Ignatius from the start wanted the Jesuit ministries to be in the cities rather than in a monastic environment removed from the city. Ignatius also knew the need for and the value of reflection amidst the hustle and bustle of a Jesuit's active lifestyle. For Jesuits, this meant daily prayer, spiritual direction, and yearly retreats. Ignatius believed that we need these reflective moments in our lives to find God in all things and experience His presence in the ups and downs of our daily experiences. Let me give you an example. It's from the world of football. Sometimes you see like the defensive coordinator or the offensive coordinator, they're down on the field with the head coach and with the players. But sometimes they go up to the press box. And what they do in the press box is they watch what's going on the field and getting a better view of it and a better perspective. And they also get a chance to reflect on what's going on there. And then they come back to the field with maybe some new ideas and some new perspectives. Using that image, I think all of us and our students need to find some time to get off the playing field where we're very involved in what we do and find a press box, our own press box. That can be having some quiet time for prayer. It can mean just taking a walk. It can mean exercise, but finding that contemplative time that we all need. What works for me now in Milwaukee is when I can do this, and I don't do this as much as I should, but going down to Lake Michigan and just walking around. It's myself, the water, and God, and just slowing me down. So that image of getting off the field sometimes and going up to the press box so you can watch what's going on, and then you come back with a better sense of what your role is. But reflection is hard to do in our busy lives, and certainly difficult for students in their fast-paced and social media world. We need to role model the importance of reflection and help student leaders, student organizations, and all students see the value of reflection in their lives. Catholic identity and student affairs. It is often much easier to talk about the values and mission of a Catholic school's sponsoring religious order than it is about aspects of the school's Catholic identity. There is much discussion today on what determines a true Catholic college and university. Public Broadcasting's Religion and Ethics Newsweekly recently examined what it means to be an institution of Catholic higher learning by contrasting Ave Maria University and Georgetown University. Now that's indeed quite a contrast. For student affairs, there are continuing tensions with programs, activities, and student organizations that can seem to be in conflict with Catholic Church teaching and Catholic values. I will begin my remarks on this topic with some background on the first and second editions of Principles of Good Practice for Student Affairs at Catholic colleges and universities, which most of you are aware of. Why were the principles written? The Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities wanted another voice on the role of student affairs at Catholic colleges and universities, in addition to voices like the Cardinal Newman Society and similar groups who claim they know what defines a true Catholic campus. The Principles of Good Practice for Student Affairs at Catholic colleges and universities were written from a student affairs and a JASPA perspective, not from a theological perspective. For the first edition of the Principles, our writers group included one of the editors of JASPA's Principles of Good Practice for Student Affairs. For the second edition of the Principles, in which we incorporated diagnostic queries, one of the student affairs experts on the use of diagnostic queries was part of our writers group. Let me give you a recent example that most of you may be aware of, but as I give this example, it's an example of tension with Catholic identity, and I want to share some thoughts on a recent issue at Creighton University, which you may be aware of. My summary of this situation comes from reading the many different reports. I have not talked with anyone at Creighton. I just wanted to see what I picked up in Google, different articles, both from Creighton and other articles about this incident. You will see in this example that there are many characters, aspects, and opinions that make the situation more complex. This is not unusual for programs and activities that may be in conflict with Catholic identity. The Creighton Students Union Board offered a free ticket giveaway to the Macklemore and Ryan Lewis concert at CenturyLink Center in Omaha. There was a protest of this giveaway by members of Creighton's Catholic Student Organization because of a Macklemore and Ryan Lewis hit song, Same Love, which advocates gay marriage. The Catholic Students Organization sent letters to the Students Union Program Board and to Creighton's president. The letter included this statement, quote, "We realize that not every act or performer that Creighton promotes will be in absolute accordance with Catholic values. But when artists so deliberately and outwardly advocate such a position, they should not be publicly supported." The Catholic Students Organization also sent an open letter to Creighton's student newspaper with these statements, quote, "University backing of any kind for Macklemore and Lewis is in direct opposition with Catholic social teaching and Creighton's stated values. Creighton's student union's actions indicate that Creighton endorses Macklemore and Lewis as well as their position on same-sex marriage." This letter also asked that Creighton cancel the ticket giveaway. There was an outpouring of debate on Creighton's Facebook page, with some alumni applauding the student letter and many others objecting, with some saying that the university should have blocked publication of the letter in the student newspaper. Others said the university should never have delayed distribution of the concert tickets. Many students and alumni took to Twitter to complain about the delay in the ticket giveaway. A freshman tweeted her displeasure, writing, quote, "Not everyone here is Catholic." This shows the impact of today's social media on such a tense issue. This would not have happened maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Creighton officials delayed the giveaway until it could address concerns of the students involved, and ultimately decided to allow the giveaway to continue, even though the school is committed to, quote, "not endorsing issues that are contrary to the teachings of the Catholic Church." The university said it is focused on educating students on social issues, and that, quote, "in the past, the university has hosted debates on the issue of same-sex marriage. We have had open sessions on this topic which centered on the Catholic tenets of understanding and inclusion." The opinion editor of the Creighton student newspaper wrote a response to those who wanted to know why the letter was even published. One of the opinion editor's comments was, quote, "Most would agree that the Catholic Church is in a time of transition. But what does that mean for an institution of higher education that has openly gay students and organizations like the Gender and Sexuality Alliance?" A spokesperson for Macklemore and Ryan Lewis said they were not available for comment. Again, I give you this example as these issues have many different aspects, perspectives, and people involved, and often letters do go to the president. Let me give you a couple of other examples. I remember often having conversations with students at Marquette who were planning the annual AIDS Awareness Week. Each group of new student planners asked, why could condoms not be distributed? I told them that we can put on an excellent AIDS Awareness Week celebrating the dignity of all persons without having to pass out condoms. University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee across the city has similar weeks, but all they do is make available buckets of condoms. Sometimes we make decisions on controversial issues from a student affairs perspective. When we had the first request at Marquette to host the Vagina Monologues, we turned down the request because the timing was bad, there were no plans ensuring the quality of the production, and no clear indication how this could be an educational activity. So sometimes when we deal with some of these tension and issues, we can respond just from a student affairs perspective because of the type of quality and what we would want in a program. Sometimes faculty voices have impact on a controversial issue. Fairfield University had a recent panel discussion for students entitled "The Pelvis and the Pulpit." The panel included some faculty members, and the discussion touched on gay marriage and the church's teaching on premarital sex. There was concern that some faculty on the panel seemed to undermine the church's teachings on sexuality and seemed to say the church is wrong about sex. My concluding remarks. These tensions and issues with Catholic identity will continue to be part of our campuses and will often have many different aspects, voices, and perspectives. Rather than pushing these tensions aside, as student affairs professionals, we can help facilitate good discussions and come up with collaborative, creative, and educational decisions. That is why it is so important today for student affairs professionals on Jesuit campuses to have an understanding and appreciation of both the institution's Jesuit mission and the institution's Catholic mission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father Thon, for those thoughtful remarks. We'd like to now open the floor up for any questions. If you have questions, we ask that you submit them using the chat function in your Citrix control panel. So please send your questions along, and we'll pass them to Father Thon for a response. Thank you. Father Thon, we have our first question.
Okay.
How do you think technology and or social media can help us rather than hinder us when it comes to integrating Jesuit education with our students?
That's a very good question, and I'm glad it was asked, because I think the example I gave from Creighton was how much the social media can bring out different perspectives on a very tense issue, which sometimes may complicate things more, and you might think, how do we resolve this? But I would hope that, especially in dealing with some of these controversial issues, that we can use the social media as educational means to help clarify what the real issues are. And I think certainly in issues like that social media and the many different types of social media would be very helpful. I think it also can be helpful in different ways to help students and faculty, especially those who don't come from a familiarity with Jesuit education or even Catholic values. We can use social media to get to the students, to provide little updates or brief comments about the relevance of the Jesuit mission today, because that's, as we know, that's where the students are, and they would look at that more. So I think social media can be extremely helpful for helping people understand more the Jesuit and the Catholic mission of our schools.
Great. Our next question comes from Katie from Boston College. When compared to non-Catholic schools, what are some of the challenges you see in the future of Jesuit educational institutions?
Thank you. Another good question. I can think of a couple. I think one of the discussions that goes on, and it's interesting. I'll give you an example, a very recent example. As some of you know, we're making a transition in presidents here at Marquette University, and there's a search committee that's coordinating the search process for the new president, and they're going around meeting with different groups on campus to get their input. Last week we had the members of the search committee and a couple of board of trustees members meet with the Jesuit community, and there were a lot of questions raised by my Jesuit colleagues about if we don't have a Jesuit for the president and we have a layperson, how can we ensure that the Jesuit tradition will be continued? And this came from different perspectives, and I think that's one thing. With more lay leadership, there are some concerns that if the president doesn't fully understand or value or communicate the mission, that could be a slow decline of the Jesuit tradition. That's happened, as we know, in other college universities through the years, who originally started with a religious mission but don't have that anymore. So I think that's one aspect that I think people will be more concerned on. And we have some very good lay presidents now who are very supportive and have integrated the mission into their work and their lives. The second part is what I mentioned with the tensions with Catholic identity. Those examples are going to continue on campus because there are many different, even among Catholics, there are different views, and we in student affairs often get involved more with them because of our work with programs and activities and student organizations. And I think that's going to be part of our lives. But I think, as I mentioned, we can really help facilitate discussions so we can see both sides of the issue and try to come up with some type of educational solution or program. So those are two things that I think will continue.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Yolanda at Loyola University Chicago. And the question is, what 5 attributes make an exceptional student affairs professional in Jesuit higher education?
Wow, that's pretty good. Wow, I think, I would probably, if we're talking about Jesuit higher education, I would probably refer to some of those enduring values, 3 of them that I mentioned. I think we really have to manifest true cur personalis, both in our work with each other, with our staff, with each other, and with students. And as I said before, it's not just good customer service; it's deeper. I think that's one. I think really being committed to understanding the mission of the Jesuit school, no matter what your background is, to see how important that is in what we do. I think our mission in student affairs has to flow from the institutional's mission. I think that's another one. I think this contemplatives in action. We all work long, and finding those reflective moments in our life and finding it in a way that fits our lifestyle. I think that's just not for us at Jesuit schools. I'd say that for any student affairs person, but that to try to integrate some moments of reflection. Those are, I think, the continued learning that as student affairs professionals that we really understand more what the student needs are today. And I lived in a freshman residence hall here at Marquette for 18 years. McCormick Hall, if you've been on the Marquette campus, it's a big round building, and there's 750 freshmen in there. And I lived in there 18 years. And no Jesuit had ever lived there more than 4. So people would often ask me if I was somewhat sane, or why did I do this? And one of the reasons I did that was to have a better sense as each freshman class came in that I could learn where they were at. That the characteristics and needs of freshmen change frequently, and maybe each year they can change. So that continual learning, and we've got to be the experts on students, and I think that's important. So those are 4 out of 5. Is that okay? That's what I can think of now.
Sure. Our next question comes from Terry, and I don't have her institutional affiliation. Forgive me. Do you think Pope Francis will have an impact on recruitment and enrollment at Jesuit colleges and universities? If so, how?
Okay, good question, because if we've read a lot of what Pope Francis has said since he became Pope, he's challenging some traditional procedures within the church and trying to have a fresh mind. I think a lot of people like what he's saying, some new views. He made one statement: we were too caught up sometimes in things that Catholic Church teaching restricts. We've got to look at broader things. He's not, going against the teachings, but he's asking for. And now he's got this new thing where he wants to have all the bishops do a survey in their diocese of what Catholics are thinking. I think it's a great idea. But I think, I don't know how that's going to affect higher education or Jesuit schools, but I think it's overall good for the Catholic Church, and because I think it's going to be have some broader views of some of the teachings and still respecting the teachings. And I don't know, he met a couple weeks ago the Jesuit Superior General, who is a good friend of Pope Francis, and the Jesuit Superior General met with all the Jesuit University presidents, and also met with the boards of trustees, chairs of all the Jesuit schools. And the Jesuit Superior General was talking about some of Pope Francis's ideas for education, and I don't know what those were. I wasn't at those talks, but I think Pope Francis is going to be a very influential person for the Catholic Church, and that certainly, and Catholic mission, and that'll affect our schools.
Great. Thank you. Our next question comes from Paul Vu at Loyola Marymount University. And the question is, at each of the 28 institutions, we end up spending a great deal of time, energy, and resources responding to the Cardinal Newman Society's agenda. Is there a better way to deal with the Cardinal Newman Society?
That's a good question. I laugh because we do spend some time, a lot of it. I remember when this, I mentioned in my remarks the example when we had the first request for the vagina monologues. At that time, the Cardinal Newman Society was taking out full-page ads in U.S. Today, really going after all the Catholic schools that were staging the Cardinal Newman Society. And I remember the editor of the Marquette newspaper came up to interview me, and she was so pleased that she had had a phone conversation with the chair of or the president of the Cardinal Newman Society, and she said and she referred to him as Father Patrick O'Reilly. I cleared that up. He's not a priest. And then she said she was so pleased that he answered the phone. Well, at that time he was one of 2 people in that office. And he's since broadened his staff. I think most presidents of Catholic schools don't pay much attention to the Cardinal Newman Society, and I think that's, I check every once in a while what their issues are on their website and what they're saying. That helps me keep a perspective of what that view is. But I think, and I've said this to myself in the past, we just don't spend a lot of energy with that group or other groups that are similar. I just don't think it's worth our time.
Great. Thank you. Our next question comes from Loyola, New Orleans. How do we continue to preserve our Catholic Jesuit mission while still addressing the needs and concerns of non-Catholic or Christian students and staff?
Very good question. Very good question. I mean, that comment I shared with you from the student at Creighton who said, I'm not Catholic, what's the big deal here? I think, especially as for some of our schools, the ratio of Catholics and non-Catholics is, there's more non-Catholics than Catholics. I think it's a challenge, but I don't think it has to be a negative challenge. I think a lot of the values of the Catholic tradition, and certainly of the Jesuit tradition, are values that are, I think, can be appreciated by anyone, because they're really good human values of how to treat others and how to help society. And I think a lot of students who aren't Catholic or maybe not even Christian, certainly from my experience as I've talked to students over the years at Marquette, if we can explain those values in that way. I think sometimes what gets confusing is that we have to sometimes spend a lot of time interpreting Catholic teaching, especially when we have some of these issues with Catholic identity, and that sometimes non-Catholics feel that's all we talk about. And that's part of what Pope Francis has said, within recent, we talk so much about some of these restrictions that there are other parts of the Catholic tradition that are just beautiful. So I think to focus more on those values that are rich values that I think even those who are not Catholic hopefully would appreciate and value in our schools.
Great. Our next question comes from Alvin Mangosing, who's actually joining us from Loyola University Chicago's Rome campus. And his question is, with many Jesuit schools developing students' global perspective and experience with international programs, what do you foresee as areas of growth and challenges to student affairs practitioners in maintaining the three enduring values you mentioned?
Okay, thank you for that question. A couple things. I think, and different campuses have that have international program offices. Sometimes those are reporting to student affairs, sometimes they're not. I think there has to really be good collaboration between student affairs and the international office, or whatever they're calling it, whether it's in student affairs or not. I think that's essential. I think student affairs has to really work with the international office to provide more international experiences. And I think that can be done, that should be done collaboratively, because I think we can bring a lot to the table in working with the international office about our students and what they're interested in. But yeah, I think that that's certainly encouraged by the recent Jesuit generals, and that whole sense of globalization is becoming more a part of our culture. So I think it's very important that student affairs be at the table when they're looking at ways that students can get involved in global experiences. We have to be at the table.
Great. Our next question comes from Peter at University of San Francisco. And he wants to know, how do you reconcile the varying approaches to responding to LGBT concerns at Jesuit institutions?
Another good question. I think sometimes, and students sometimes think this, and I've dealt with students, they think Jesuit schools are all the same because we have the mission. And I remember when we were first looking at our initial Gay-Straight Alliance, which was the title then, and a few other Jesuit schools had already had a similar group. Students were saying, why can't we have one? Other schools do. I think each of our schools has a similar mission, but we're different because we're in different parts of the country. There's different cultures. There's different bishops. Presidents are different. Presidents have different ideas. I remember during the 90s when some schools were starting gay-straight alliances, there's some Jesuit presidents that didn't even want to talk about it on their campus. So I think as the services and programs continue, and as some offices are set up for LGBT students, schools are going to do that differently. And I think as we work with students, we have to help them see that the culture, the history of a particular Jesuit school is different than maybe our own school. But we started here at Marquette last year a gender resource center, and there was a lot of time before that when they did research on what other Jesuit schools were doing. And there were some different ways to do this. Some schools didn't have that type of center. Some schools had a lot of programs. And one of the interesting things at Marquette when they created that center, they put it under academic affairs rather than student affairs. Schools do that differently. And again, it was important for student affairs to be in collaboration with academic affairs for this type of office. But again, schools, presidents, bishops, they're different, and they approach this differently.
Great. Our next question comes from Stacy at Lemoyne College. How do we empower students to own Jesuit values with increasing numbers of students coming to higher education not raised in a religious tradition?
Okay, these are good questions, because I think that's a challenge for us during the coming years, to keep the mission alive. And I think, again, as I said earlier, to try to separate the values, certainly of the Jesuit tradition, from what people may think about Catholic teaching. And, I think certainly a value of cura personalis, respect for the dignity of each person, is a value that I would hope every student would see as important, whatever their religious background. There's another one which I didn't talk about, but I talk about in the book, and that's the one we're familiar with, the magis, the more, searching for excellence in all that you do, realizing your potential. Those are great values for students, and they don't have to have a Catholic background for that. So I think, and I think that's why I call them enduring values, because they've lasted for 460 plus years, and they're still very relevant. So I think to approach it from that sense, and to really understand those values and see how we can help, like if it's student leadership training, that having those values as part of the Jesuit mission, I think certainly magis means a lot to student leaders. So I think focusing on those relevant values, I think that can help.
Great. We'll have two more questions before we conclude. The next question is from Pat from John Carroll University. What are some ways to connect new professionals who have not had a Jesuit background to the university's Jesuit and Catholic mission?
Okay, good question. As I mentioned, when I wrote the first, it was really a monograph, the Ignatian Perspective. That was one of the reasons I had for writing that. No one had ever done a history of student affairs in Jesuit higher education. But what I did in that book, that monograph, I compared, JASPA had just come out with their principles of good practice, and I compared those with some of the values of Jesuit higher education. And in the new book, the Ignatian Imperative, I compare a lot of the values of the Jesuit tradition with the emphasis in the student affairs profession over the last 20 years on learning. I think a lot of our new professionals come from student affairs graduate programs, and as I talk to young professionals and would hire people here at Marquette who did not have much familiarity with Jesuit Catholic education, but when we talked about some of our values, they were saying, oh, these really relate to things that I learned about student development. They're right on. And I think that there's some clear relationships between student affairs. So I think to do for new professionals to help connect some of those, and certainly that's why I wrote this book, because certainly JASPA is aware of this. With a lot of people that we are hiring as young professionals do not come from a Jesuit or a Catholic background, and ways that can help them understand the missions without feeling threatened or feel that it's propaganda, but that they really relate a lot of what we in Jesuit education, they relate to a lot of the student affairs, student development values.
Great. And this final question is somewhat related to the one you just answered. It's from Patrick from St. Louis University. If understanding the mission of Jesuit universities is so crucial, what are the best sites from which to gain a solid understanding of Jesuit mission and identity? Is there a program in place across the AJCU or other Jesuit organizations?
Okay, good question. Yes, certainly I would I'd say read my book, and I'm saying that because that, you know, as I said before, we were able to provide complimentary copies, and that was my, I wrote the book because I thought this would be of help for new professionals to understand how student affairs is connected with the mission and some of the history. But certainly the Association of Jesuit College Universities provide a lot of programs that different staff members can get involved nationally. Your mission and identity office would certainly know those. And JASPA, you know, and as I said in my remarks, one of the things I wasn't planning to do when I started writing this book, but I ended up doing was summarizing some of the themes of the 5 Jesuit summer institutes that have occurred since 1990. And it just sort of, you can see through that JASPA itself, both in our annual conferences but in our summer institutes where we're together for 5 days, we try to do this. I mean, this is, we know that if you want to talk about just student affairs type things by itself, you go to NASPA or ACPA, but the JASPA Summer Institutes have done a great job of trying to educate people and deepen people's understanding of the mission. That's a mission of JASPA, which I applaud wholeheartedly.
Great. Thank you very much, Father Thon. On behalf of our 28 member institutions, I want to offer a heartfelt thanks for taking the time to share these pearls of wisdom with us this afternoon. We really appreciate you serving as our inaugural speaker to JASPA's webinar series.
Thank you, Casey, and I appreciate all of you who took the time to tune in, and I wish you all the best, and be patient. You can't learn about the mission all in a day or even a webinar, but just keep working at it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And for our JASPA members, just a couple of announcements. There will be a post-webinar questionnaire that will go out in the next day or so. I'd like to encourage you all to submit that questionnaire, and if there are additional topics that you're interested in for future webinars, please make those noted in the questionnaire responses. And then last but certainly not least, I want to remind everyone that we will be convening at Loyola, Maryland, March 15th to celebrate the 60th anniversary of JASPA. The conference registration website will be live shortly. For more information, please go to www.jesuitstudentaffairs.org. Thank you again for joining us for our first webinar. Have a great day.